So continuing with our backend server with Node, in this lesson, we will learn how to define post, put and delete requests. We had covered the get requests in the previous video. So if you haven't seen it, the link will be in the description. Just go and have a look at it first. So just recalling, there are four commonly used REST APIs: get, post, put and delete. Get we had defined and learned in the previous video. In this lesson, we will cover post, put and delete. So what is post? Post is used to send data to the server to create a resource. Put is used to update a resource and delete is used to delete a resource. So continuing with the example that we were doing, the server students, what do we need to do here? We need to define a post slash server slash students. So what does this mean? What this means is that we will get the details of a new student and we will create that student in our server. So let us go back to our code and see how do we make that. So this was our server. So like we have done app.get. So for post, we will write app.post. What is the path? Slash server slash students and function rest comma response. Now what do we do here? We will need to get the data that has been sent for creating the resource, for creating the new student. So we can just say let body is equal to request dot body, and let us just do a console dot log body. Let's go ahead and test it. So let's go to our postman, and here we will need to create a post request. What is the URL? Localhost colon 240 server slash students, and we will need to send it a body with the details. So what is the body? It's a JSON. And now what do we put within this JSON? So what are the fields required? Let's just go ahead and check. So we need name, course, grade and city. So let's put that in. Name is say Alice. Age is say 28. Course is say Node and city is say Paris. Now we can send this. So let me just go ahead and send it, and it gave me a not found. Why did it do that? Because I should have restarted my server. Let's do that. Let me go back and send it again. And let's see, what do we get here? We are listening on that port and we have gotten this object. So this is what we were looking for. Once we have gotten this object, what should we do? We should put it into our students data. So we can just say students data dot push body. So we could have done that. However, we need another ID field. So we need a ID here. So we could just take the ID from here, the last ID, or we could maintain an ID. So depending upon whatever logic we want to use, we could just take, we could find the max ID. Let max ID is equal to data dot reduce st dot id greater than equal to accumulated, then we will return st.id, else we will return accumulated, and we say start with 0. So we get the max id. Now what we can do is, instead of pushing it here, let's just construct let new id is equal to max id plus 1, and let's create a copy of this JSON. Let new student is equal to id will be new id, and let us just spread the body. So the other fields we get from the body, and we will now push the new student. And now as this operation is successful, we can just say response dot send new student. So the typical response to a post is to send the resource that we created. So which is what we have done here. Let me restart the server. And now if we go to our JSON, it gives us an error. Let's test it. ST is not defined. So this should have been, instead of ST, this is current.id. Let's start it again. And we can see we have gotten ID 23, Alice. And how can we test it also? Let me just call the same URL with a get request and 23. If we get it, this is what we had defined earlier. So we get exactly the details we wanted. If I do another post, so instead of Alice, let's call it, say, Bobby, age say 25, and let's call it, say, React London. Now if I send this, we have gotten ID 24, the next ID that got created. So we have gotten that details. Let me test it with, say, all students. Let me get all students. So if we check now, we have 23 Alice and 24 Bobby. So this is how we have defined the post. Next, what do we want to do? We now want to do a put. So what is put used for? Remember, put is used to update a resource. So just like post, we get the details of a resource, but instead of creating a new resource, we are updating the resource whose ID has been specified here. So the ID is the ID of the resource. So in this case, it means that we are updating the details of a student whose ID is specified here. So in the body, we will get all the details, the updated details, and this is the ID of the student whose details we want to update. So let's go back to our code. So like we said, app.post, we will now say app.put. Path is /server/student/:id. It gets the ID as a route parameter. Now what do we need to do? We will need to take the ID is equal to request dot params dot id. That is how we used to get the ID, request.params.id, and we want it as an integer, so we will add a plus. And the body, we will get the body as let body is equal to request.body. So now we have gotten these two things. So now what do we need to do? We need to replace the details at this ID with the details that have been provided in the body. So one way to do it is that we find the index of that ID, and then at that index we just replace the object. So let's find the index. Let index equal to students data dot find index st such that st dot id is equal to id. Now once we have found the index, then what should we do? We should be able to just say students data at this index is what we will replace with this new details. So let's create a JSON. Let updated student equal to id will be the id that we got, and rest let's spread the body. So we have created this JSON, and now in this position we can put the updated student, and as a response typically to put, we will just send the response dot send the updated student. So we found the index, we updated it, and we are now sending it back. Let's start our server again. And now we need to create a put. So let's create a put. What will be the URL? Let's copy the URL from here. And which is the student we want to update? Let's say the student we want to update is say ID2 Tim. So /2. Now we need to send the body. So in the body we will raw, and it's a JSON. Now let's create the body. So name is say Tim. What do we want to? We want to say update the course to React and the grade to say B. Grade is B. Remember in Postman, when you're defining a JSON, it expects the identifiers, the field names to be in comma, in quotes. Then we have course is React, and what is the fourth thing? We have city is Paris. So the city remains the same. So let us now send it, and we get back Tim as the updated. Let's go ahead and test here. Let's get all the students, and we get Tim B React Paris. So Tim has been updated. If I sent it to somebody say 45 and I know this ID does not exist, then what should happen here? It should give us an error. So let's go back into our code. If we do not find this ID, we should have gotten an error. So we should also put in an error handler here, which is to say if index greater than equal to 0, then we should do all of this. Else what should we do? Response dot send status. So like we did in the get, so we can just send a status with the no student found. So we will just send a 404 again, status 404 dot send no student found, and we could even specify the ID, or this could be fine. So let's restart the server. And now if I do a put here, what do I get? I get a 404 no student found. So this is how we define a put. So we found the index and we updated the details of that student. Next, we want to delete the student whose ID has been specified. So remember, what does delete do? Delete is used to delete the resource. So the ID whose ID has been specified, we will delete that student from our details. So how should we implement it? So same way we can say app.delete. What is the path? /server/students/:id. Function request comma response. Now what all do I get here? I just get the ID. There is no body here because I don't need a body. We just need to delete it. So let ID is equal to request.params.id, and as it's a number, we will put a plus. Now what do I need to do? I need to find this ID in the data and then remove it. So how do I find the ID? Let's find the index. Let index is equal to students data dot find index st such that st.id is equal to id. So we have found the index, and what do we need to do? We will just say students data dot splice at index, and we will remove that object. And we could also save it here. Let deleted student is equal to. In some cases, it's a requirement that you send back that resource that you deleted. So if you want to implement that, we can just send response.send deleted student. So this should now work fine. Let's go back to Postman and to test it. Suppose we want to delete. We had created student 23. So these are our students. And remember, why are these values not persisting? Because we are restarting the server. So any change we have made, obviously because we are using it again, so those values are not seen here. So suppose we want to delete student 3, which is Anna. So let me fetch the details of Anna. So this is student 3 when we use the get. So now in the delete, let me just send that. And we have gotten student 3, Anna should have been deleted. If I now try and get again, we get no student found. So perfect. If I want to delete a student, say 45, now there is a problem here. It gives me say 22. So what should we do here? We should just put a condition if index is greater than equal to 0. If we found index, that is when we should do it. Otherwise, we should just send dot status 404 dot send no student found. So otherwise, the ID where we were asked to delete did not exist. So we have sent a 404. Let's test it again. So now because the server got restarted, so I'll find Anna again. So let's go ahead and delete the details for student 3. Let's check with the get. So no student found in the get. Now if I delete student say 45, I get no student found. So this is how we implemented our post, put and delete. And these are, along with get, are the four most commonly used REST APIs.